What does it mean to be a foreigner, an expat, or a transplant? A quick online search will give you definitions such as a person who lives outside their native country, either temporarily or permanently, or a person not belonging to a particular place or group, or a stranger or outsider, or an individual who has moved to a town or city from another location, typically outside of the immediate metropolitan area. These outsiders are viewed as having different customs, traditions, or perspectives compared to those who grew up in the place where they currently reside. Many times, they stick out like the proverbial sore thumb, eat weird foods, laugh at weird things, and have funny accents. Sometimes these things are seen as bugs, and sometimes they're seen as features. Digging deeper, we also find that outsiders possess adaptable, resilient, and open-minded traits that enable them to navigate life outside their native country or region. They are often culturally sensitive, independent, and are able to build support systems in a completely new environment. They possess a sense of wonder, adventure, and are open to new experiences, even when the road ahead is winding and full of blind curves. The truth is, whether you're moving away from something or moving toward a new opportunity, it takes a lot of courage to pack up your things and head for a new place. It is often exciting, scary, fulfilling, disorienting, socially rewarding, lonely, enlightening, and confusing, often all at the same time. Whether you've moved 100 miles from home or 10,000 miles, you've probably had some very interesting and often unexpected experiences. In 2019, I was standing on stage at the Creative Arts Emmys in Pasadena, California, and I was part of a team that just won an Emmy for an animated short film that we did in partnership with Radio Flyer. It was a very surreal moment, and to be honest, it was one that I never really expected to happen. Even after years of working for an award-winning animation studio. Right before we got up on stage, Guillermo del Toro and his team had won an award. And so following him just added to the surrealism of the moment. That moment wasn't special because it represented a pinnacle in my career. I think it was special because it gave more weight and value to the journey that I had taken to get to that point. And that journey started 4 decades earlier, standing next to my brother in front of Globe Cinema in Trinidad and Tobago. So I was born and grew up in Port-of-Spain Trinidad, which is in the Caribbean. And my mother raised my brother and I in this tiny little 1-bedroom apartment on Tragarete Road. And it's in a place called Green Corner, which is where it was like a hub of activity. There was a taxi stand there, so all of the taxis would start there. There was an arcade, there were several restaurants, but most importantly, there was a cinema right around the corner, and that was Globe Cinema. Globe was the premier cinema in the country. But the thing about that area is that there were 8 other single-screen cinemas within walking distance of where we grew up. And so my brother and I were the Trinidadian equivalent of latchkey kids, which meant that we spent a lot of time on our own while our mom was working. So Globe had this little screen built into the wall on the outside of the theater, and they would run trailers all day on this little TV. And in our free time, my brother and I, when we weren't in the arcade playing games like Tron and Joust and, Pac-Man and all the other stuff from the 80s. We would just go stand and watch these trailers play over and over and over again. And that was sort of the beginning of my love for cinema. Because my mom was a single mom, she would take us to the movies all the time. Probably saw movies that were slightly more sophisticated and probably less age appropriate for someone like me. But, it's something that really shaped the way I view the world. We also had our fill of comics and TV and, collected action figures, Star Wars toys, G.I. Joes, Masters of the Universe. And as I got older, my mom would take me to Disc Drugs in downtown Port-of-Spain to get the latest novels by Stephen King. And, I just had the most fun and nerdiest upbringing that any kid could have. And all of that was wrapped in this blanket of Trinidadian culture, which is a mix of African, Indian, European, Chinese, and indigenous influences and traditions. And, for me, seeing Peter Minshall's man crab costume was just as mind-blowing as seeing the 1980s version of Flash Gordon at Strand. And so I had this growing love of the arts and creativity. And like most kids that age, I had no idea what to do with it. And I did grow up in an artistic family. I mean, my brother's an artist. My uncle is an artist. I have cousins who are musicians. We had all kinds of animals in the house, alligators, monkeys, gooties, you name it. And my uncle is actually a martial artist. So we would run around in my grandmother's backyard playing with shurikens and nunchucks and swords and all other types of probably, again, things that little kids shouldn't be playing around with. But times were a lot different back then. And so, when I started figuring out who I was as a human being, and it took me quite a long time, those were the things that I ultimately started drawing upon and still draw upon to this day. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, we were most recently a British colony. So our education system is British. And the way it works is when you are, about 13 or 14 years old, you sort of pick the subjects that you will do sort of the rest of your academic career. So I wanted to do a lot of artistic subjects. I wanted to do literature and, but my mom sat me down one day and she said, look, you have a few brain cells knocking around in your head. So I want you to actually do business subjects. And so I went on that track for a long time. And by the time it came around to me choosing a path in higher education, I decided to do marketing so that I can kind of straddle that line between business and creativity by going into advertising. And I was fortunate to get a scholarship to go to Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, which is a historically Black college and university. And I spent 4 years there getting my marketing degree. Living in Baltimore, I had an aunt that lived in D.C., and after graduating, I eventually moved out to the county and worked and lived in Ellicott City, Maryland. And that was my first taste coming from an HBCU where I was surrounded by other kids from the Caribbean and kids from African nations. This was, the first time that I was actually immersed fully in American culture. And predominantly Caucasian American culture, because the company that I worked for was primarily Caucasian. And it took me a while to get used to really simple things about American culture, like showing up on time, which is very, very different for people from the Caribbean because there's a colloquialism in the U.S. That's called colored people time. In Trinidad, we call it Caribbean people time. High fiving was a big thing. And I was like, man, why do all these people, every time something good happens, they want to high five? It's still very weird to me that Americans love high fiving so much. But I try to roll with it when I can. Uh, so I spent like 3 or 4 years there, met someone who's still one of my best friends to this day. He's a huge movie nerd like me, big horror fan as well. But the job itself really was not challenging for me. It was not fulfilling in any way. So I sort of drifted a little bit until I decided to go back to grad school because I wanted to do a PhD in marketing so I could become a teacher. But of course, life had other plans for me. I eventually graduated with my master's from Radford University in Radford, Virginia, which is very different from Baltimore, Maryland. So Radford sits in the Appalachian region of Southwest Virginia, much smaller town, very much kind of laid back and beautiful area with all of the trees and all of that, but very, very different from larger American cities and absolutely different from Trinidad and Tobago, that's for sure. And after I graduated, I worked in personnel finance for a while, corporate finance, tried to find my place, and I just really struggled. Other than becoming a huge football fan, college football fan, going to Virginia Tech games, enjoying Appalachian culture in all its glory, all of the wonderful heavy foods and moonshine, all of the good stuff that comes with that region of the United States. Ultimately ended up in Shreveport, Louisiana, a place that I had never even heard of before moving down here. And by this point, I was almost 40, and personally and professionally, I was just sort of drifting, trying to figure out what I could do with my life. I saw my friends back home in Trinidad and the ones that stayed in the United States. They were all moving forward in their careers. And I was just kind of struggling and drifting, and I couldn't figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And then one day I stumbled into a small animation studio that had just won an Academy Award. And they were looking for someone to help them on their business side with recruiting and human resources. And I said, yeah, I could do that. And after working there for several months, they actually let one of the production managers go. And I walked into my boss's office and I said, hey, I think I can actually do production management. And he looked at me and he said, I think you could do it too. So he said, let me think about it. And then the next day he came back and he said, look, I'm going to give you a shot. And that's when I really started my career in film and entertainment. And I eventually became a producer. I became an award-nominated and award-winning producer, and then ended up on stage at the Creative Arts Emmys in Pasadena, California. Now, there are certainly other chapters in my story, but that parallel, that sort of closing the loop was really meaningful for me and is still meaningful for me because the thing about it is, when I was a child in Trinidad and Tobago, standing there next to my brother, staring up at that TV, watching trailers for awesome 80s films with tons of explosions and, big hair and bigger boobs, I never imagined that I would actually be able to work in the industry. It never even dawned on me, even back then, that I would even live in the United States. But here I am decades later, and I have a beautiful wife. She's wonderful and supportive. I have an amazing daughter, I have a dog, I have a house, and I'm living in this town, Shreveport, Louisiana. Again, a place that I had never even heard about until right before moving here. And this is where I have planted my roots. And I have been so fortunate to be able to do the things that I get to do every single day. I am now the executive director of a nonprofit art house theater that also focuses on education. So I get to blend two of my passions. But the other thing that this part of my journey has given me is a voice and a platform and the ability to reach out to people and share my story with them. And it's something that ultimately I hope will resonate with folks. And that is really why we are here today. My name is Wendell Riley, and I am delighted to welcome you to the Freshwater Yankee podcast, coming to you from Shreveport, Louisiana, by way of my beautiful home country of Trinidad and Tobago. Freshwater Yankee is a colloquialism for someone from Trinidad who has, after coming up to the States for a short time, usually just on vacation, they would go back home with, American clothing, American mannerisms, and most importantly, a pseudo-American accent. And for us, it was a way to make fun of people who did that. But I think, it's a great way to contextualize my journey, but also it's a jumping off point for some of the things that we will be talking about in this series. For the Southerners in our audience, I just want to let you know the term Yankee isn't used in the same context as it's used in America. In fact, in Trinidad, we basically call all Americans Yankees. So a freshwater Yankee is just someone who's not really from here, but pretends or acts like they are from here. And for me, having been in the United States for over 2 decades, so much of my life, especially the really, really significant career portions of my life, have happened here in the U.S. I've started a family here as well. I've put roots down here. And, it's very likely that I will spend the rest of my days in this country. So what we want to do here in this podcast is use that term, this idea of what it means to be someone who has come from one place to another, and have that be a launch pad for universal storytelling. So the goal of this podcast is, through stories, discussions, and academic research, we will explore how geography, culture, and circumstance shape who we are and how we change and evolve as we move across borders, whether these borders are literal or metaphorical. We'll discuss comparisons between regions, identity, belonging, and the search for personal, professional, creative, and spiritual actualization in the journey of life. So I'm hopeful that whether you took your journey from a small town to a big city or from one country to another, I hope that we can capture the essence of what it's like for you to, redefine yourself in a new place, to embrace what is new while holding on to the foundational aspects of who you are, and how you, as an outsider, can positively impact your new surroundings. And, in a time of cultural and political complexity, globalization and migration, I hope this podcast will help us recenter ourselves. It'll help us discover who we are, but most importantly, to see each other and really see each other as the human beings that we all strive to be. People who want the same fundamental things. People who want to live good lives and be happy and healthy and prosperous. Because of my accent, people often ask me 2 questions. The first one is, where are you from? And then I tell them I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and then I often have to explain where that is and that it's a Caribbean island or 2 Caribbean islands. And then that is quickly followed up by a second question, which is, well, why the hell did you leave paradise to come to Shreveport, Louisiana, of all places? But I tell them jokingly that I got tired of going to the beach every weekend and eating great food and, partying every night, because instead I wanted to be stressed out all the time and work 50 hours a week. And we laugh and, move on. But in truth, I tell them that there's so many things I love about this town. And Shreveport is a great place to raise a family, and it has some really cool things. And it has afforded me a life that I never even imagined that I could have. And for that, I will always be grateful. But it reaffirms the fact that I believe that we all have interesting stories to tell, because where we grow up is always interesting to other people. And so as a foreigner, I'm always aware of the fact that I am living in a place that is different from where I grew up. So it's always fascinating to me. And so part of this podcast is me bringing in my friends and colleagues along the way to share their points of view, to share their stories, to share their research and their witty observations about this wild and wonderful journey of life. So I hope you'll come back for more episodes, subscribe, join our community, and share with your friends. And as we say in Trinidad, we go talk later. Freshwater Yankee was produced by David McMillan and Lauren Leon McMillan. Our associate producer is Jesse Stevenson Riley. Music was provided by Peter Sandy of Home Base Productions, and I am your host, Wendell Riley.